Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below and I pick from those each week. Usually I'll pick about 20, 22, nothing personal if I didn't pick your question. I may not have even gotten to it before I just there's so many questions every week, so don't be offended by it. It's not personal. I'm just trying to pick some ones that maybe I haven't covered in a little while or haven't never covered to answer each week, and when I get to a certain number, I stop. Let's see, a couple things. Every week I get questions about this celosia, and I keep forgetting to answer them. This celosia is called Flamingo Purple. There are some here and there's some in the front garden, and it was in the tour video. We talked about them in the tour video as well. It's a tall one for sure, probably a little taller than I'd want it in this annual border right here because I planted some perennials behind it, and they're kind of hidden. This may have to have some control added to it. The other thing is that Golden Falls Redbud back here behind me. Every week I get questions about how I got my sweet potato vine staked like that, but it's actually yellow foliage Redbud. But then when I was in Columbus this past week, for those of you who aren't following me on Instagram, I put up a few photos from Columbus. After I had gotten back from the other trip, I took off for the Cultivate show, and one of the spaces had a staked gold sweet potato vine. So that was actually kind of funny to see one, and literally it does look exactly like that Golden Falls Redbud does behind me. So that was kind of interesting. I put up Erin's tour video, the Impatient Gardener's tour video. You will have seen by now if you haven't watched it. Her garden is beautiful up in Zone 5 in Wisconsin. And what else have I? You will have seen a home tour. Probably something else at this point. Honestly, it's a blur. But I've got a deer that has settled into this back garden. This is wooded space behind me. I'm in a super urban area, but there is one little wooded space behind me that has never been developed in a neighborhood that's 90 years old or more, 100 years old, probably from the beginning to here. It's about 85 or something, but where the neighborhood started, it's probably 100 years old. But this space back here has never been developed, and there's a deer back there, and when you leave town, sometimes they can really settle in. So I've been letting the dogs explore this space a lot more in the last few days, trying to get their smells out here in mine, hopefully to deter them in this small space. It's got plenty of options in the neighborhood. I'm hoping just to make this one less appealing. Can't do much about it other than that. I may have to start spraying a few things. That's life. So let's get to some gardening questions. Somebody has bought an Arborvitae Fern, which is actually a fern. Selaginella is the genus for the Arborvitae Fern. It looks like a little tiny Arborvitae, but it grows like a fern, so that's why somebody called it that combo word. But Selaginella is actually the genus. Great plant. I've got one planted here around the corner. Mine is in part shade, kind of a semi-moist condition over there, and grows absolutely. It's literally wheat. It's gone from a little pot like this to this wide in a single season. The question was, the tag says full sun, but then reading online says part shade, and then so I would have never even thought to put that plant in full sun. And mine's in the part shade over here, and it's doing fantastic here in Zone 7B. I think that's a 6 to 9. I think it's Zone 6 to 9. Maybe in Zone 6A or 6B, you could probably put it in a little more sun. But for me, it's definitely a part shade plant. But what was funny is, this is how the internet is. I went and looked it up just to make sure before I, brought the question up, and just made sure I wasn't incorrect in having it in the part shade. Again, doing fantastic. And sure enough, 3 different websites had 3, part shade or shade, sun or part shade, full sun. It was all over the place. I think there's a lot of copy and paste on the internet. So if somebody gets something wrong and it happens to be on a rather popular site, that can get copied and pasted and over and over and over again. So, but I would definitely say in Zone 7B, 8, 9, that's a part shade or even shade plant. If you put it in shade and it's too thin, then it's probably telling you it needs to be in a little more sun. Mine's kind of in a park shade space and it's very full and thick. But I would be interested. Somebody's obviously grown it in full sun before and it did okay, and then that's how that got passed down. But I wouldn't put that plant in my garden in the full sun. Anyway, interesting how, you know, not bad information, but if you see a full sun tag, you're definitely going to think it has to go in the absolute full sun. If it said full sun or part shade, at least it had some chance of going in some protected spot. Somebody has a hummingbird plethora that is, they planted it last year and it bloomed all pink. And then this year it's got some pink and some white. Look down at the bottom of it and see if it actually is two individual plants. You may have a hummingbird and a ruby spice in the same container. I bought 3 ruby spice, what I thought were ruby spice plethora, and one of them turned out to be hummingbird. So I have 2 pinks and a white, but it's within, a lot of the nurseries now stick 2 or more cuttings in the same container. So it's within the realm of possibility, being that the ones I got were mixed, that if you had 2 cuttings in the pot, both the 2 cuttings could be different. So I'm just wondering if that's what it is. Just look down at the bottom of it and see if you can see. There is some possibility, plants will do that, where you'll have different color flowers on the same plant. But I would think if you saw it all pink last year and mostly pink this year with just a few whites, my guess is it's a couple different plants in that container. I will say that hummingbird has a little bit more of a weeping habit. Not weeping, but sort of weeping compared to ruby spice. Ruby spice is very, very vertical. There's definitely a growth difference between them. Somebody asked me if it was necessary to do all organic in containers. And I don't know what the actual question was. I don't know if we're talking about organic potting soil or organic fertilizer or not spraying them with pesticides. I didn't know the kind of the nature of the questions. I'm guessing we're talking about fertilizing. I'm just throwing out a guess. I mean, you can use water soluble or slow release man-made fertilizers in your containers for sure. I use organic fertilizers on everything out here just because I don't even want to buy multiple fertilizers. But I have said if you were going to use synthetic fertilizers, the containers are probably the place to do it because you can get slow release ones that will just release over the whole season. I will say that overall, the recommendation for fertilizing containers typically is way too much fertilizer for them. I did a container plant update here, maybe two tour videos ago. If you go back and watch those, they have not been fertilized except for when they were planted with a small amount of organic fertilizer. I really do feel like slow and steady, it wins the race with containers, that if you push them too hard, they end up filling out too quickly. You end up with insect and disease problems, root-bound plants, much shorter season, in your baskets and containers. If they're getting root-bound, they're harder to keep in good shape. So my only argument is less about, some sort of environmental worry. The other thing is, if you're putting a ton of fertilizer in those pots and then you're watering it, that nitrogen is leaching out, of the bottom of the container, unused nitrogen. The plant will only use what it's going to use. The rest of the fertilizer is going to get leached out of the bottom of the container. So, again, I just use organic fertilizers on everything. It's just easier, and I think in general, most recommendations are way too much fertilizer. More fertilizer than you need. Okay, if you're asking me about chemicals, in containers, then no, I'm not going to spray anything on I'm not spraying anything on anything. If something in a container had mites or some sort of problem that I didn't want to deal with, there'd be a new container plant in that container. Somebody asked me my opinion about using a dying tree to support a vine. If you watch Erin's video, she has a climbing hydrangea on a dead tree that died from a borer, and they wanted to know my opinion on it. My opinion on it would just be based on whether that tree is a hazard to other things. So at some point, the tree is going to come down. A dead tree, is going to come down. So, if it's out in the middle, of the landscape and it's not much to it, then maybe. But if it was that tree was a threat to my house or a shed or the rest of my garden or my neighbors, or I had a young kid or whatever, I probably wouldn't. But hers, I think, will just collapse on itself where it's standing, and it won't be a threat to really anything. But that'd be the answer as you analyze that. Is it 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that tree is potentially going to come down? Could it come down ugly? Would be the question. Somebody asked me where I buy seeds. I've shown Johnny seeds quite a bit. And the only time I order from Johnny's, if I'm going to order several things, their freight's a little steep, and they'll charge you the same for one packet as 10 packets, basically. So if I'm ordering several things, I'll order from Johnny's, but their freight is not that great. I order a lot from Parks. Park Seed has little shiny packets. Those are, I usually get quality stuff from them. I get a lot of stuff from Baker Creek. Baker Creek tends to have some things that others don't have. And all of my zinnias, those giant zinnias that are in the front garden, they're all from Baker Creek this year. And they're all fantastic. But I am an equal opportunity seed purchaser. I will buy them in garden centers. I'll buy them in box stores. I trade seed. I've got some okra in the garden over here that's from Buddy Lee, and a few other things like that. That's one of my favorite things, is if you've got friends who collect seeds, especially on old varieties. That okra variety is older than Buddy's family knows. And I grew some of them. I grow them to collect the seed on them, and that thing can get 15, 18 feet tall and big giant stalk at the bottom. So it's also an interesting, you can't pick the okra anymore, but I'm letting them get that big just to get the seed on them. But so I'm an equal opportunity seed collector, trader, and purchaser. Okay. Somebody asked me, they said, I had mentioned in one of these Q&As that I had a shade slope video, a tour video where it had a shady slope. That video's up, and I called it one of my favorite garden tours. That was Lynn and Jim Swanson's house. I'm going to be covering more on there as well. If you don't get much out of the 25-minute video I put up already, there is more content coming from that garden, but that's the video that you're looking for. It's weird probably on YouTube, because if you watch these Q&As, it's probably recommending the Q&As, and it may not be recommending the other videos to you that are in between. I don't know how YouTube recommends anything. Somebody did put down 18 inches of wood chips in their garden in May, and want to know when it is time to plant. They were talking about using mully grass and some other things. Couple things, if you're going to use mully grass, I'd probably spring plant that anyway. I've talked about not planting grasses in the fall, so at least spring. 18 inches of wood chips is going to take a little while to break down sufficiently to plant in. I would think that's close to a year, probably. When the maple came down in the front garden, I had the stump ground, and I just left the material there, and then I waited another 8 or 9 months. I did put a little bit of additional fertilizer on that space out there, just to give it some nitrogen, because it needs nitrogen to break down. So, but I would say at least 8 or 9 months of that stuff breaking down. I put the wood chips in this back garden. It was only about 6 or 7 inches, and I waited maybe 5 or 6 months to plant. But 18 inches, I'd probably wait a little bit longer than that, because that's actually deep enough where that could actually get kind of hot on them. But again, if you're planting grasses, I think it's best to plant ornamental grasses in the spring or early summer anyway. So I would just wait and do that. There are some plants that are probably tolerant of just being planted in wood chips right out of the gate, but others it will discolor and yellow. My purple hibiscus that I have along the fence out here the last 2 seasons, they're a bit stunted over there because I planted them directly in some wood chips. I had a bunch of extra wood chips, and I put them along that fenced area, and about 2 months later I planted my seedlings into that. They've broken through and they're growing now, but it probably slowed them down at least 5 or 6 weeks. So keep that in mind. Things won't be as vigorous right out of the gate if you don't give those wood chips adequate time to break down a bit. Again, there's no steadfast rule. I'm sure there's something I could have plugged in there, and it would have just grown like crazy. Somebody wanted to know what my water bill is, and I'm usually I'm on the city water, so I'm having to pay sewer going out, even for my landscape water. So you know, I don't have a second meter. I mean, I wish I had a second irrigation meter. They're very expensive, but if I had a second irrigation meter, my water bill would actually be lower because you don't have to pay sewer on an irrigation water. But I'm running somewhere around 150, 160 when it's peak summer, but that's only about 3 months of the year, and then the rest of the year it's under 100, and that includes, again, that includes sewer. So I'm basically paying double. I've got a friend around the corner, I think his is around 250. I think he's watering, but he's got a giant oak in his landscape that, you know, it's just hard to get the plants to compete against and look good. The plants he has in the ground have been in long enough that they would survive, but they wouldn't look lush and beautiful without some irrigation water, without irrigating, because of that oak. And I don't have to do that. I don't really have a tree I have a tree off the property that's kind of dominating shade-wise, but not root-wise. But I don't think that's too bad because this is my hobby. You know what I mean? If I was playing golf, you know, once a week or, you know, whatever, you know, it would be way more than that. So if you're, you know, think about it that way, you know, about your water bill. If it's something that you enjoy and it's part of your life and it's, you know, I mean, I can just not go out to dinner, you know, twice a month and eat the produce from the garden over here that I'm using the water on. And I've got that money back easily. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Somebody asked about onion seed timing, when to do their onions from seed. This is the answer to when to do everything from seed. So onions will go out right at the end of your threat of last frost. And so for me, that's generally around middle April is my average last frost date. So I'll look at middle April as being the time that I want them to go in the ground. And for onions from seed, it's about 8 to 10 weeks. Starting them from seed until they're transplantable size. And if you'll look at any seed packet on the back, it'll say 6 to 8 weeks for transplant, 8 to 10 weeks for transplant, or 4 to 6 weeks, whatever it is. That means that's how long it takes the seed to germinate and come up and be a transplantable size. Again, April 15th being the day I'd want to plant my onions in the ground. I'm backing up 6 to 8 weeks. 8 to 10 weeks from that. That's where I'm starting the seed. I don't know what your average last frost date wherever you are is, but you can easily Google that, find out what that date is, back up 8 to 10 weeks, and then do your seed at that point. There's no point in doing it earlier than that. That's the way I do the math for that. Somebody said I should have a video for Jim's rants. At some point, maybe I'll cut out my a few of the rants I've had about certain things, and I've got another one, not really a rant toward the end, but one that is always concerning to me about the internet. A lot of comments about the 100-degree conditions everywhere. I said in the tour video this week, I feel super fortunate because we were in that 100-degree thing there in June for a little while, and then you know, it backed off for whatever reason in this little pocket I'm in over here on the east, and I've gotten a few thunderstorms. All my temperatures are predicted mid-90s for the next 10 days, but I at least have some chance of rain during that period of time. So I feel super fortunate here. So a lot of the lushness of this garden, it hasn't been watered. I actually think my water bill will be much less this July than it was last July because I've gotten thunderstorms and they've come like 3 days apart, which has been kind of perfect. I know for a lot of you though, you know, I'm feeling your pain because I've been there as well, where you have, you know, what seems like endless upper 90s, low 100s, or 100s days with no rain, and you're watering constantly. Some of the things that are for full sun don't seem to be for full sun when the temperatures are like that and you have dry air. But, you know, I use shade cloth. If you have something that you know will tolerate the full sun, but it's so newly planted that it's not, you can get shade cloths from Amazon, just a thin cotton cloth or some sort of frost protection blanket. You could probably search it by frost protection blanket. Those things will probably would help to cover some things on midday, you know, during the midday heat. But the main thing is to water. If you can, water early in the morning, and then get out of the heat yourself. But yeah, I feel bad for a lot of folks, but I do use shade cloth to help. If I planted something and then a week later it was in the hundreds, I'll try to figure out some way to get some shade on that plant temporarily through those days, and then I'll take it off. Once we get toward, you know, mid to late August, the days are getting shorter, and even if it stays hot like that, typically we get less burning going on just because the days are shorter. I get so many redbud questions. These new hybrid redbuds, like my Golden Falls back here, or Flamethrower, or Ruby Falls, or any of bunches of them. I get so many redbud questions. There's so many weird problems on those things. But I had somebody with a Flamethrower and it leafed out low, but the top of the plant did not. The only way to know if that's still alive is, and it's really late in the season, if it hasn't leafed out yet, it's probably not going to. But you can bend a branch and see if it breaks, or scratch the bark and see if it's green underneath. I think by mid-July, you would have seen leaves if it was going to have leaves. So you're probably just gonna have to cut it down to that height. As long as it's not down below the graft. It didn't sound like in the description that the growth was at the bottom. If the growth is at the bottom, very base of the plant, that's not a Flamethrower redbud. Flamethrower is grafted onto another redbud. So as long as the growth is above the graft, then it is still a Flamethrower redbud, and you just would have to cut it down to that height. I think it's probably past the point that it's coming back. Okay, Celosia Flamingo Purple. I don't know why I answered that at the beginning of the video, but it was a question. This is a beautiful Celosia, and man, are the bees happy with that thing. They will just hit every single flower on every one of these spikes out here in the afternoon. Right now they're working Summer Jewel Salvia, and I don't know, you could probably, I don't know how I mean, it's such a distance from the camera, but there are tons of bees and wasps working always the Summer Jewels early, and then they'll move to some other things, the Celosia, the Joe Pye weed. You can kind of watch them migrate through the landscape, different times of the day, different flowers seem to appeal to them. Somebody wanted to move a Fatsia to a more protected spot, so they've got it out in open area. Fatsia is barely hardy in zone 7, probably is really hardy in zone 8 to 10. It's a tropical looking plant. I've shown it. You can look up videos on my channel for Fatsia or Fatshedra, which is a combination of Fatsia and English ivy, a non-aggressive ivy, basically. When they want to move one to a more protected spot, as soon as it's not 100 degrees or really super hot temperatures, I would get it moved. Normally, I would tell you that spring would probably be the best time to move a marginal plant, just because I don't want to put an additional stress of transplanting it right before the winter. But if you've got the thing out in open space and the winter is actually a threat to it, my air conditioner just came on. I hope it doesn't pick it up, but it probably will. If it's in a spot where the winter could damage it, I would go ahead and move it as soon as the temperatures back off a bit, so that it's transplanted in its new home for a little while before the cold comes. Let's see. Yeah, because you're basically talking about whether or not to save the plant. So yeah, you need to go ahead and do it. Somebody asked me about how to go about removing annuals to plant some new ones. So if you got some annuals that are burning out already, maybe you're in zone 9 and you have 2 annual seasons because your season's so long, how to go ahead about doing that. Normally, I would like to pull them up, shake off the roots and then put that stuff on the compost pile. But you might, if you're not remulching at all, if you're not putting down any new organic material, I would probably just cut them off. And then plant in between them. And the reason for that is the weeds. If you pull sunflowers up and shake the soil off of them into your bed, and then throw that thing on the compost pile, you're gonna have pulled up a lot of weed seeds in that bed. So the decision for me would be, I'd pull them up by the roots if I was going to put down a little mulch in the bed after I planted my new annuals. If I'm not gonna add new organic material, I'm just gonna cut them off to the ground and plant in between them. And you can even use a mower in some situations like that. But that's how I would go about making that decision. Just wrote down to say thank you to everybody for all the kind comments that I get just in general across the board on all videos. Last week's question and answer just had a lot of people that had said thanks for the information and that kind of thing. Thank you guys for watching them. Somebody's white wedding Hydrangea paniculata stunted. I have 2 in full flower here. You can see them in the background on a couple videos this past week or next week. And it's, for whatever reason, it was slow to leaf out this year, and then slower to, it maybe is budded now, but not much going on with it. It hasn't been that aggressive, it hasn't been that vigorous in the ground. I think that maybe just the amount of time it's been in the ground combined with, I don't know where you were, but that March 13th freeze that I had here was significant on slowing several things down. I've got a butterfly bush in front of the 2 white wedding hydrangeas that has just started showing color in mid-July, where all the rest of my butterfly bushes have been blooming for a while. And that one got slowed down because it was already leafing out at the time that freeze happened March 13th. So if your panicle hydrangeas were waking up at that time, and I've talked to a lot of nurserymen, there was so much damage. We had a mild winter, plants were starting to wake up, and we got slammed with a hard freeze, significant hard freeze right before that. So it could have been that as well, just depending on where you were. If you're in the eastern US, could have been that damage. But if something seems stunted for a prolonged period of time, sometimes I'll go back and replant them. I'll take a shovel, put them under them, raise it out, maybe think I'm overwatering it and raise them up some. Maybe, you know, I've mulched too high up on the stems, and I'll go back and check and make sure that I can still see the top of the root ball from where it was in the container. I'll just assume there's some sort of planting issue if that continues. If it doesn't break through and start to put on some vigorous growth or bloom later here in the summer, I will replant stuff. I'll replant it back in the same exact spot, but I'll raise it up and think that maybe I did something wrong in the process of planting it, or it's had some root damage since from some critter or something like that. But that is a strategy I'll use. It's just, if it doesn't seem vigorous, I got it in the wrong spot, or I got it planted too deep, something, and just replant it. So I just got a general question about how the sun travels across this landscape, and you can see it blowing out behind me on that building. The sun comes up. I'm early in the morning filming this in the middle of the week. It's like 4 days early this week, so sorry if you've asked a question since then. I have not seen it because I've got some other things going on, so I needed to shoot this early this week. The sun comes up directly across the front of the house, so the house faces due east, and I mean due east. This time of year, the sun is a little bit north of Raleigh, and so it tracks on this side of the house, on the north, from east to west, obviously, but on the north side of the property. And so the vegetable garden area over there in the front of the shed, you can see, it just gets blasted a good portion of the day. This side, the south side, tends to stay a little bit more shady most of the day. There's a redbud on the south side, and then this big giant oak is on the south west corner of the property, and it kind of dominates. So this area actually back here is part shade or shade in the summertime. In the winter, the sun is tracking more south, and so it comes up in the east, sets in the west, but it's tracking south of Raleigh. And so this side over here tends to be the sunnier side coming into where I'm sitting right now. But again, the house faces east. I have to shoot videos very, very early in the morning because the sun gets up over a couple trees on the other side of the street, and it starts to run me out of here. And it's doing that right now. You can see the line in the sand. Eventually, I'll be in the sun in another 30 minutes or so. And this spot stays sunny in the back garden about 4 hours before that tree puts it back in the shade. All right. Somebody asked about controlling vining weeds. There's really not a whole lot you can do other than pull them. I have porcelain vine out here, which is also invasive, that comes up just everywhere. The birds are spreading it into this garden, you know, especially with this chain link fence that runs around part of it. And you know, it's just porcelain vine everywhere. But I just have to pull it. I mean, there's no good answer to these things. On most weeds, you can have less of them over the years by mulching them, staying on top of them, not letting them come to seed. You can reduce weed populations by being vigilant. Unfortunately, though, birds are bringing some of these seeds, or I got English ivy back here in the woods that are just literally dropping seeds occasionally into the landscape. Those, unfortunately, that get moved around that way, you're going to have to pull. You're going to have to continue to hand pull them. There's no good answer for that. Nobody wants that answer, but That is the answer. If a bird brings a seed to your yard, it's going to germinate and you're going to have to pull it. Because especially vining things, because they're going to be up under other plants. You wouldn't even have a herbicide control if you wanted to use a herbicide, which I don't, but if you wanted to, you wouldn't be able to probably. Let's see, without hurting your plants. Then the last question for this week, I think this is number 20, 21, something like that. Somebody wanted me to do a video at some point just showing off all these videos that they see about adding milk or eggshells or aspirin or turmeric or hydrogen peroxide or you name it to plants. This is another one of those rants I've had in the past. Anyone, and I can't say it any more clearly than this, anyone recommending you add anything to your soil other than just a basic fertilizer, without a soil test is not steering you in the proper direction. If you put eggshells next to your plants and they perform better than the ones on the other side, then maybe your soil needed calcium. That's not even a calcium that's in an available form. There's soluble and non-soluble nutrients, meaning that some of them can be taken up and some of them are in a state that are like in the soil but can't be actually accessed by the plant. My guess is that eggshells, at least for some period of time, would not be in an available form for your plants to take them up anyway. But I've seen banana peels and, oh my gosh, for potassium and so many different things. The only way that one of these things would help your plants is if your soil was deficient in that thing that you were adding, if that makes any sense. There's no point in putting down, banana peels or aspirin or hydrogen peroxide or any of it unless your soil is deficient in that particular thing. Bath salt, not bath salts, but whatever I can't remember. Anyway, there's so many things that people want that recommend, oh, look how much this is going to improve your plant. Those videos, unfortunately, I'm putting up videos and getting, 10,000 to 50,000 views or something over the course of a month. Those videos can get 3 million views because somebody says 5 tips to help your plants grow faster. It's just clickbait video and they show you putting aspirin or whatever around the plant and the plant somehow, miraculously, some miracle, it performs better. It probably is just, guess what? You can take a plant that's a little older and put it next to a plant that's not and say that one had aspirin and one didn't. It's pretty easy to do that in film, to lie to people on, in movie magic. Unless your soil actually needs that nutrient, there's no point in using it. And why in the world? I'm not against certainly using banana peels and eggshells and all those things in your compost pile. Same thing with coffee grounds and all the other things. I can just go on and on and on for all these things. Just keep the ground covered in organic material, fertilize once a year, throw all that other organic stuff on your compost pile, let it compost and reuse it as compost. That'll put it in an available form for the plants anyway. And, don't let internet clickbait dictate your gardening. Thank you guys for following along with the channel, and lots of videos coming up this week. Thanks for watching.